Welcome to the Own Your Time podcast. This is the host, Kyle Marcotte, and today we have Elisa Zhang on the show. Elisa is the owner and principal of over 1,000 units via 1031 exchange and syndication. This allowed her to leave her day job, and she is now a full-time real estate investor. She now focuses her time and expertise on helping typical 9-to-5ers quit their job in 10 years or less. Welcome to the show, Elisa.
Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah, so let's get into your story of a very interesting one. And I'd love to just talk to the audience about, how you got from where you were all the way to where you are now, 1,000 plus units, massive portfolio, and just a lot of fun stuff.
Yeah, sure. I'm just gonna give the fast lane version of it. So we started in 2009 when the market is down, kind of similar to maybe a couple years from now. So so buying opportunities coming. So we started with a condo. We bought a condo. We really didn't know what we're doing. I think for me, I always to kind of like dive into things head first and just try it out, see if it works or not. So that actually, we didn't have a lot of cash flow, but originally our goal was to buy 7 properties, pay them all off, and then retire. And we knew that's going to take a while until we had a third property. Then we ran into not having enough money. So before we kind of saved that for these, right? And also as the year kind of goes by, the price of the housing, I live in Seattle, near Seattle, is kind of going up and up. So very quickly in 2015, my daughter was born. So if you have a child, it changes a life perspective. So for me, you're no longer kind of just living for yourself. You now have responsibilities and you want to spend more time truly with someone else. Not that I don't want to spend time with my husband, but it's very different. uh, because there's a human being that is relying on you, right? So from there, it really got me thinking about how can I truly quit my job really quickly. So I did that by researching on the internet, literally just typing in Google, like, how do I quit my job using real estate? And guess what? BiggerPockets came up, and then I just devolved all the content on BiggerPockets for a good month, just reading every single blog that was of any relevance. And also actually met some people from Seattle from BiggerPockets, right? Just kind of meet them, have lunch with them, ask some questions. So from there, I realized that I was doing this all wrong because you should be having cash flow. And so I'm like, oh, geez, we're doing this all wrong. So we started then sold our 3 properties. Gladly, we had a lot of equities there. We bought at the right market. And 1031, which is kind of a vehicle for you to defer taxes into a couple of fourplexes. So that kind of allowed us to start playing the cash flow game. We did the BRRRRs. What is BRRRRs? I think is buy, renovate, buy, renovate, rent, refinance, and repeat. So basically, we did a couple of that strategy. My husband did the men work, the construction work, and I did the management work, which I managed all my tenants, make sure it's filled with the right tenants and this and that. So from there, I always think about when you're growing, you should kind of choose a knowledge base that it's a little bit bigger. So like your knowledge of circle of knowledge, it kind of grows one step at a time. So then I took, because I was managing itself, but I was like, geez, like I can't imagine myself if I want to go FI, like having to deal with the tenants all the time. So I wanted to try out to work with a PM. So I went a little bit further outside of Seattle in Tacoma, about an hour and a half from us, then bought a 12 unit. And I took on a partner. So there's a couple of things I learned from there, which is now I got into the commercial world, multifamily. Well, because anything above 4 is commercial. So there's a different kind of lending mechanism. And I get to learn how to manage a partner and the PM that is kind of somewhat remote, right? And my husband no longer doing construction on them. So that was a very interesting experience. And then from there, we bought a couple more small apartments, and then we realized there's no more deals to be had because the market just keep on going up. The cash flow doesn't really make sense. So we started looking out of state. So that's a natural transition into, because owning smaller property, 12 unit, we know it's kind of challenging. So again, with that FI in mind, we went a little bit bigger because it's supposed to be easier to manage for the larger properties, and especially when we go outside of state. So from there, we started doing syndication. And at first, I passively invested in a lot of deals and kind of figured out some knowledge. Also did a lot of education myself. I met Jake and Gino. I met Brad Sumrock. So these are all like my mentors. And from there, we met different partners that is in the market where we want to invest in. So they serve kind of like a boots on the ground. So through partnerships, I was able to leverage other people's resource, like time specifically. And from there, we went to Dallas market first, and then we started the Phoenix market. So now we have eight properties, yeah, over like 1,000 unit as principal. Yeah.
Wow, quite the story, all the way from 2009 all the way up to here. It's just amazing to see the growth. I want to touch on one of the key points that I heard throughout that story, which was you kind of wanted to move away from the lower units and get into bigger units. What is the reason for that? Is it actually easier or harder to manage bigger ones? What's the whole point behind that?
Yeah. So the whole point was I'm always have a goal. Like, even though sometimes people will be like, oh, you're all over the place. I'm like, no, actually, I just had a one MO, which is going financial independent, right? But after you go FI, I want that, like, I basically had this pictured in my mind how my typical day going FI will look like. And that involved working remotely. I didn't want to be there managing the property day in and day out because then I just earn myself another job. So that was very important for me. So managing the small unit, the 12 unit, I noticed the property management in this area, in this arena, are usually smaller timer. So property management company, like it's a very hard business. They don't really get paid a lot. So then you kind of get the bottom of the barrel of these talents. And you essentially have to train them how to do stuff yourself. And I was lucky because I was managing my own units before. So I have these knowledge to leverage to help them guide the way, and knowing like stuff that when they're doing is not effective, right? Versus the larger property management company, which will only take, by the way, like, some of them will only take more than 100 units, some will only take more than 65 if you combine with another portfolio. So at that caliber, when the PM company owns like 20,000 units versus one that owns like 200, there's a huge difference in terms of professionalism and the stuff that they have seen. So you can kind of lean on them a little bit with knowledge and whatnot. That being said, I still find, even with the large property management company, like the couple key things that as an asset manager you got to keep on is, lease up is always the differentiator. And for some reason or the other, it's always somewhat like missing. It doesn't matter how big the PM companies are. And the other way is kind of like efficiency of using expenses. So you have to kind of watch a little closer, right? And so that was kind of the reason, we went bigger. And I would say bigger seems to be easier in the fact that it satisfied my criteria, but you're busy with other stuff. Like, for example, if you're a syndicator, because by going bigger, you need more money. So you can do 1031 exchange to get there. Then you don't have to manage anyone else, right? But if you're syndicating, that's another side of busy work in terms of business. So there's more work there. And also, just looking through financials and et cetera, you need a different kind of muscle, which is looking at a financial report to be able to tease apart what the problem is by looking at the numbers. I happen to be pretty good at it, so that helps. Whereas like the smaller PM company, I noticed, things are just kind of hit and miss, more swing in terms of like really kind of leverage on one person. Whereas the larger company, it seems like I can lean on a little bit more. But I do want to kind of touch on, because everybody always says more than 65 is easier. And I would say, PM was probably most the reason why. We have a property that's 36 unit in Phoenix that we figure out a way to manage remotely with our partners. But our partner become very crucial part of that. So that may be something to think about. It is easier, I think, the large property, a couple reasons, like the experience of the PM and the fact that for larger property now we have partners. So that may be the reason why I feel like that's easier, because now I can leverage their time and their presence in the location. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. As far as time freedom, that's kind of been my whole philosophy, and I think it's a lot of people's philosophy when they get into multifamily. And when you're on those 12 units or 10 units, I own a 12 unit in Atlanta, and it's takes me more time than the 107 unit in Louisville. So it kind of
Uh,
is mind-boggling to see that happen, but it is the truth. But before we go on to some of the other questions, I'd like you just to define what FI is, because we've used that term several times in here, and I just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So what is FI, and then what does it mean to you?
Yeah, so FI stands for financial independence. And to me, it's the freedom that it exchanges for. Um, and I'm pretty strict on the definition of the FI. Like if I have to work a 9 to 5 job or just earn the income by doing a job, that is not FI. Like FI means that if I can quit, like I just don't do anything, I don't deal with my investors, I don't do anything tomorrow, the money will still come in so that it will supply a reasonable standard of living for my family, where I feel like I didn't have to go back to work. Like essentially nobody owns me. That's kind of my definition of FI, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm assuming that there's a massive transition there from you being in the 9 to 5 world and then becoming financially independent in such a big way. What is something that you can give anyone advice on as far as transitioning from, having to work that job and relying on that earned income to a point where money can come in whenever, and technically you could just lay on your couch all day. So how do you get up and take on the world and make that transition?
Yeah, so I think it was actually a tough time getting transition over. And me and my friend went FI about the same time. He went a little bit, couple months earlier than me. And we kind of exchanged idea on that, like, hey, it was kind of tough, like, kind of self-complaining with each other. With I have two small kids, so that actually makes a huge difference, because now you're a lot more available for them. So I think this COVID-19 time is giving everybody a preview of potentially what their FI life look like if you have small children, which is like you're kind of stuck with them all the time. So it was kind of hard to kind of carve out when is the fun the time, when is actually, because now you govern your own schedule. Um, and a lot of time people also talk to me about losing motivation. So I think I never lost motivation because I started a business, which is, real estate syndication. And by nature, it didn't just let me, you know, go sit on my couch all the time, right? So like, because still have to talk to my investors sometimes and etc. As even if there's like a new projects or whatever. But I wasn't producing much. Like after I quit, I was like, wow, I'm gonna have so much time. So you're probably gonna get into a period of like you're gonna work more, and then you realize your life balance is off. That was not exactly what you wanted when you get FI, even though you have a picture of what FI look like. And then you kind of take a pause moment and readjust, get settled into the new norm. And so I went through a whole period of that. And I would say like the COVID, I hate to say this, actually helped me in a way that I couldn't go anywhere. So there's no distraction, because I used to fly to Dallas like every month. So that's a lot of time out of my day, and being separate was my baby boy and then all that sort of stuff. It was a little tough. So it kind of actually helped me settle into the lifestyles where we kind of have the regular 10 to 5 or 10 to 4, whenever we feel like it. And then on the weekend, I can decide to either do an extra day or just hang out with family, or any day is like weekend, could it be? So, but it is good to kind of still have somewhat of a schedule. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Any day, every day is like the weekend. I love that.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So let's talk about EZFIU, which is your kind of course, right? And I know that it's somewhat around 10 to 12 modules, but I'd love for you just to give the listeners probably the best module. If you could only pick one, what would you walk the listeners through and what would help them the very most?
Yeah, so my favorite is actually module one, because it sets the tune for the whole suite. Um, I always believed in that when you're sailing to somewhere, you must have a destination. For me, it was always a destination, but not everybody's like me. I know I've met people who's like, we'll see what goes, right? But for me, everyone who I met who are super motivated, who has retired early, they always have a goal, like either a time frame or goal. But it kind of gets boring with that. So in that one unit, we go through, what does a typical day look like for you when you go FI? So to help transition the transition I went through, right? So by the time they go FI, it just kind of smoothly transitioned over. These are the stuff I want to do. So now I have another list of to-do lists for you to do. And then the other part is just feel inspired, because when you set a goal and you break it down, then you see that, wow, I can retire in 10 years. So like our mission was to help 9 to 5 people retire in 10 years or less. To a lot of people, it's like mind blowing, right? Like, how could you do that? Like, at least 20, 30 years, right? But by my calculation, my personal experience, that it's totally doable for some people who has a little bit more asset, or they're more frugal. They can get there in 5 years, maybe even 3 years. So be able to kind of paint that picture and knowing what exactly is important to you. It's kind of the spirit part of it. And be able to kind of break it down into a roadmap where you have yearly goals where you can kind of hit it. That is like super powerful, I think.
That's an awesome one. Yeah, I have a similar kind of philosophy with the whole ship and the captain and stuff. So I think that's awesome. Just having a course, because when the winds change and the seas get rough, if you don't know where you're going, it becomes a very tricky situation. And I think that a lot of people can relate to that. So it's definitely a
Yeah.
great way to start the course. I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
So let's get into some more of the syndication side of stuff. I know that there is a difference between a limited partner and a general partner and a passive and active investor. Could you lay out those differences based on roles and also the structure of it?
Yeah, so I think the general partner is actually kind of an old term because in the security law they used to define general partner, LPs and GPs, limit partner, general partner. Nowadays nobody actually writes it that way in the law description. So they would just say sponsors, co-sponsors, or investors, right? Or passive investors. So it's I think active partner or GP, they're similar. They're kind of similar thing. And then LP, limited partner, or passive investors are kind of equal. And then right now, kind of get into a little literature details here. In the law, they will usually say Class A or Class B member. One is being active. They're essentially trading their efforts for pay, right? So, and then they actively control the property. And then the passive investor, it's just kind of checking them out. Like, it's people who invested with their money. So they're leveraging actually GPs, resources, and work, but they don't have a lot of control over the property. And then they get essentially a distribution, either a quarterly or monthly distribution. So that's kind of like the difference between the two, that they don't really have control rights versus the GPs or the active managers, that they are actually really in it. I would say, a lot of people who wants to be general partner, they get really excited. They go to these group courses. They're like, I want to be general partner. But over the time, I would say like my eventual goal is to transition some of my stuff mostly to passive, right? And then I would just act as advisor on thinking if this is a good project or not. Because it's a lot of work to be an asset manager. And that's another term being used. Asset manager is the person who is actually operating the property, right? So usually it's interchangeable as active members, because all the active members should be doing something in the deal. Yeah, so I think that that's the difference between that. It's one has control, one does not, and one trade time for money, and the other is trading money for other people's time. When you're thinking about it, Robert Kiyosaki's book, like the best leverage is actually not leverage other people's money, is actually leverage other people's time and their resource and talent. And that's kind of what I come to realize. Yeah.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. I actually really like the way you broke that down as well. I think the listeners will really enjoy that and maybe even start to realize that there's actually a lot of value in being an LP. And I've kind of started to realize that myself as well. So that's awesome. Let's finish the show with the question I ask every listener, which is or ask every guest. What advice would you give a 20-year-old or 20-something who is starting a business or a real estate investment business?
Yeah. So I think it's kind of like a more of a life advice, per se. And when I look back to my 20s, I really didn't start my investing journey until I was like 29, perhaps. And every time I see someone young like you, I'm always really excited because you have so much more potential to reach there before I even like started my job, like started my journey, right? So, and I think when you're being young, like I spent a lot of time partying and stuff when I was young. So I feel like there's days wasted. I think there's life experience, you know. But you're in the position, especially when you're out of college or when you're even inside of college, you have so much energy and that's your resource. So because you have so much energy and you have no dependent like kids or husband or spouse or all that, like spouse can be useful in, you know, helping you, but you don't have kids, which really commands your time. So your time is your best asset. Again, it goes back to time is the best asset in the world because nobody gets more, right? So you are actually at the prime, you have plenty of it. So really thinking about intentionally, if you kind of like just work really hard for 5 to 10 years, you get like a whole oasis in front of you. So just kind of thinking about, hey, how can I actually trim off my expenses and accelerate it by, you know, reinvest it into, because you need money to invest in real estate. I think you can have zero money down, but that's a lot harder path. If you have some money, that helps really with real estate investing. So really kind of try to look at the expenses, where you can trim the fat. When other people are partying, go party somewhere, but you know, maybe party one less day or two less day, like, you know, like, and then really kind of get into like the business side of it, setting up the goal and grinding at it and having the habits of grinding, because it accumulates so much more. Like Tony Robbins always says, you know, like you kind of overestimate what you can achieve in a year and underestimate what you can achieve in 10 years. It's that accumulation. And, you know, think about it. If you started with 21, by the time you're like a 31, you're done, right? And then because you only have one person, you can do all these like cool strategy, like house hacking and all that sort of stuff to maximize it. So you could be done when you're like a 25-year-old. And that's awesome because the rest of your life is free.
Yeah, that's a really exciting thing to think about. I just love hearing that kind of advice. It's just really refreshing, and that patience, the compounding effect of it all, and having the right habits. So I really appreciate you coming on the show. Where can people reach you if they want to get in contact with you online?
Yeah, you can go to my website, www.easyfi university. The U is spelled out, university.com. And then over there, you can kind of schedule time with me, or reach out to me. Look for me on Facebook, Elisa Zhang, or, you know, LinkedIn. I'm active on these two as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, and you've added a ton of value to the listener, so I appreciate you so much.
Thank you, Kyle.